Well, it could be. I mean, we're very close, I think, to the Fed finishing. I think the key message, though, is they can't kind of tell you they're about to finish. They're going to obviously give a hawkish message around that, and they could either sort of, in the second quarter, declare an outright pause like the Bank of Canada, or they could keep it more uncertain in a way that almost say that we might be done, but we'll see how it goes. In the end, I think they're going to be done, though, around 5%. So this could be the penultimate hike on the back of that.
Dominic, two ideas here. You made worldwide headlines, I should say, was super restrictive the last time you were on. Is this the Fed nearing or in a super restrictive phase?
Yeah, I mean, they are super restrictive. I mean, it kind of depends on how you look at inflation, and we look at it very carefully in a lot of different ways in terms of the impact of inflation expectations, wage price spirals you mentioned earlier, and dissecting it in terms of demand drivers and supply drivers. And when you sort of dig really deep, I would argue the inflation story is looking very good. It is basically normalizing. We're putting to bed the fears that inflation was in a whole new regime. And when you look at that, then essentially when you measure a monetary policy in terms of restrictiveness, both in terms of real interest rates and financial conditions, there's only one conclusion, and that it is super restrictive. And you mentioned NASDAQ doing well, et cetera, but overall financial conditions are still very restrictive. And there is a danger that as you squeeze out the excess demand and profit margins, you're in a hard landing before you know it. And that's why the Fed has to be quite careful not pushing rates too high.
Dominic, we're going to talk to Richard Clarida, founder of DSGE. We're going to talk about the time continuum on the x-axis. The way I see it, and you mentioned this, is an extended period of rates here or a little bit above versus pushing rates up to a higher rate level. Can extended and can an extended Fed substitute for the migration to a higher rate?
Absolutely. And I think the point is that the idea of the soft landing versus hard landing is like a sequencing. You can basically do the soft landing, keep rates an extended period elevated, but in order to avoid the hard landing, you need to scurry very fast to get back to neutral, which we think, and the Fed certainly still thinks, is around 2.5%. And that's the story for 2024. So the danger is of not doing extended, but just, for example, to keep on raising rates means you just got much more scurrying to do at the end of the day, and with more risk, I would argue, of making a mistake that you can't move fast enough if you're already, at say 6% funds. So it's basically staying around 5, getting to 2.5. That's doable. You do a bunch of 50 basis point cuts in 2024. It's quite aggressive, but they can do that, and that way they avoid the hard landing. This isn't a choice of soft versus hard landing. It's a soft landing until it becomes a hard landing, and that's why the Fed needs to be very alert to that reversal in policy, which we'd expect in 2024. Not this year, but 2024.
Dominic, I'm feeling a little bit philosophical as we talk about Fed communication and the market's response. If the Fed speaks and markets don't respond, did the Fed make noise, right? I mean, basically, if the Fed tries to give guidance, stop laughing at me, tries to give guidance, but the market doesn't sell off, is that actually effective in getting the Fed's, you're still laughing at me, in getting the Fed's message across?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Fed needs to get the bond market selling off. I mean, the bond market obviously is looking through all of this and discounting a pretty restrictive policy stance in terms of rates. Obviously, it's the financial conditions side of it. It's basically the dollar and credit spreads and equities. So I think if there's too much of a sort of relief rally in these things, then they can definitely push back and they can definitely sort of try and jawbone financial conditions tighter by introducing this uncertainty around maybe the peak in the funds rate, the uncertainty about how committed they are to actually a pause, and that's very likely they'll do that. I'm not sure they'll do that today. They could hint at that, but it's certainly very likely in Q2 or maybe in the March meeting when to do that. And I think Larry Summers, I mean, he said something sensible over the weekend in terms of maybe the Fed shouldn't. I said that very carefully. Maybe the Fed shouldn't really pre-commit to hikes, and that's really would be an interesting thing if the Fed Fed could perhaps have a bit more uncertainty around their policy going forward, even if they are effectively pausing with the benefit of hindsight.
That's the line in the morning, Tom. Run.
Oh,
just
God, the show's over.
I've got nothing left. I've got nothing left for the rest of the today.
Put it up there. Come on, Amy, give me that banner, please.
Constant.
Summers.
Something sensible.
Good morning, Professor Summers. And we look for the panel in London, Lawrence Summers and Dominique Constant. That'll be a great
He's still
panel.
in bed. Don't worry about it. He's not woken up yet. Dominic Constant of Missouri Americas. Dom, thank you. That was perfect. Wasn't that perfect? Lisa, you've been spending time in nature. What was that about? All philosophical,
The best thing-
in the woods, trees falling, all of that good stuff.
Okay, this is the conundrum that the Fed has. Their messaging depends on the market's response. If the Fed speaks and markets don't respond, did they get their message across? Did they affect the transmission that they were searching for? And it's a legitimate question, which is the reason why there's sort of this gamesmanship going on, this chess game between the Fed and markets right now.
I agree. I think it's actually the question going into this news conference, because we've asked a couple of people already what's important here, the data or what Chairman Powell's got to say. They're choosing the data at the moment, which says something about what they think about what Chairman Powell's got to say.
And perhaps Chairman Powell doesn't care. Perhaps Chairman Powell is saying, look, you guys have it better than I do because you're the, collective minds that are coming together to price out the potential economic trajectory.
That spread's got to reconcile, Tom. How it reconciles is one of the big questions over the next couple of quarters.
I hope to say something sensible in the next 3 hours.
We'll go talk with
I
Summers.
can't imagine, John, what you're going to
Larry
say.
Summers actually said something sensible.
And Tom tried to banner it.
Thank you, Tom. Futures down 0.4% on the S&P. Live from New York. This is Bloomberg.
Keeping you up to date with news from around the world. With the first word, I'm Lisa Mateo. Policymakers at the Federal Reserve are expected to moderate interest rates and increases again today. The Fed is wrapping up its two-day meeting. Chair Jerome Powell is likely to keep further rate hikes on the table, while leaning against bets the central bank will cut later this week. Inflation in the Eurozone, well, that slowed down more than expected in January. Last month's reading came in at 8.5%. That suggests there will be a more heated debate to come at the European Central Bank over how much more interest rates should rise. The UK has been hit by its most severe day of strikes in more than a decade. As many as 475,000 union members are on strike today, closing schools, crippling the nation's rail network. They're demanding pay hikes to offset the cost of living crisis. Investors hurt last week by the malfunction at the New York Stock Exchange are trying to get their money back. But Bloomberg's learned that claims are likely to exceed the liability pool that covers losses. Those losses could total in the millions of dollars. The crisis of confidence plaguing Gautam Adani is getting worse. The stock sell-off triggered by Hindenburg Research's fraud allegations has erased a third of the value of his companies. That's more than $90 billion. The flagship company, Adani Industries, lost as much as 20% today. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Lisa Mateo. This is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Balance of Power with David Weston brings you news, analysis, and insight from and about politics power players. Balance of Power, weekdays on Bloomberg.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
The Fed is expected to dial back to a 25 basis point hike.
They want to make sure they don't go too far.
A pivotal moment to make some decisions.
But will they go so far as to signal a pause?
We have a long ways to go.
Trust Bloomberg for the fastest coverage and exclusive analysis, including former Fed Vice Chair Richard Clarida.
Recession fears are tangible.
What's the mistake this year? Doing too little or doing too much?
Stay tuned. This is going to be with us for a while.
Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed decides. Today on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Folks, just outside this space, the first piece of the new Hudson Tunnel is being built. It's one of the biggest parts of the Gateway program. Now, let me say this at the outset. This is just the beginning. Americans see these projects popping up across the country, and it sends an important message that we're going to, when we work together, like we did in the bipartisan law and the CHIPS law, there's nothing we can't do.
The President of the United States there. Good morning to you all. The price action this morning looks a little bit like this going into the Federal Reserve decision a little bit later on this afternoon. Equity futures down by 0.4% as we kick off the month of February. I really don't know where the last month went. But it went like this for the Nasdaq. The Nasdaq up big time, up more than 10%. Three things to watch, not just Chairman Powell later, also the economic data later on this morning and some earnings from Meta after the close to kick off things for big tech this week. Look over to Europe, euro-dollar 108.94. We're positive there, a third of 1%. Downside surprise on CPI for the Eurozone going into the ECB, but with a monster asterisk. Where's Germany in all of this? Capital Economics publishing just moments ago, and they said this: January's drop in headline inflation should be taken with a pinch of salt because of a data processing problem meant that the data for Germany had to be estimated and might therefore be unreliable. In any case, they went on to say, Lisa, the key point is that core inflation remained at a record high, so the ECB will remain very hawkish.
To me, that was my takeaway, is that, yes, on the headline number, you did see a deceleration. It came from energy. It came from uncertainty in some of these readings. On the flip side, core inflation, still very hot. And so, therefore, the ECB's narrative really doesn't change.
Expected, Tom, to go 50 basis points tomorrow.
Is that? I'm not there.
Well, we've had the guide from the ECB.
No,
I think President Lagarde basically
yeah.
told us that herself.
Okay, but what's the damage they do with that? I just don't have a
pricing
nominal
it in.
GDP
But
figure.
here's the thing: the market's already pricing it in. It would be disruptive if they went 25 basis points in a way that they didn't necessarily want.
The big reset yesterday. I mean, you're right, but to me, a big part of this is the GDP numbers came in not as gloomy as the gloom crew.
Sure.
To me, that helps Lagarde with 50.
The green light's on. They're going to go 50. Will they go 50 again after that?
Are
The
you
guidance
flying
seems
over there
to be.
tonight? Are you going to be in the
They
lawn
might
again
be. I don't
Friday?
think I am. I think I've got a long day this afternoon, Tom. But maybe I can make that flight.
I'll take the golf.
Would you like me to skip the Fed? Would you like me to skip the Fed?
Have you ever had a Schaefer's beer?
A Schaefer's beer?
Schaefer.
No.
Then they were bought out by Stroh's.
Okay.
And then PBR, Pepsi Blue Ribbon, took them all out.
I trust we're going somewhere constructive with
We're
this.
going somewhere constructive. What do you do in Washington when you've got to get the two sides together? Anne-Marie Horton knows this because she's a student of history. In June of 2009, it was President Obama, Vice President Biden, Gates of Harvard, and other attendees quaffing beers in the Rose Garden. Maybe we'll see that today with McCarthy and Biden. I mean, there's theater to all this. Anne-Marie, what is the theater today of McCarthy meeting with Biden?
Well, Newt Gingrich called it like a first date. This is the first moment since McCarthy took the speakership that these two men will be sitting down together. And you're not going to get any news on they reached an agreement when it comes to the debt ceiling, which is obviously this debt ceiling is what is hanging over them during this first meeting. But it is a chance for them both to size each other up. So, Tom, you are correct when you say this is really about watching the optics, watching the body language, and seeing the statements that comes out of this meeting.
What is the body language that a really interesting set of the GOP want from their speaker? I think, Anne-Marie, particularly for our international audience, this is a complete mystery. Is McCarthy one of them?
Well, he's not exactly one of them, but what he does need to show is that he can deliver. He had 14 rounds of a chaotic, very dramatic speakership, and he cut some deals with the far right of his party, and he needs to be able to deliver on some of these promises, which is why this is going to be incredibly challenging for him when you have the President of the United States and the Democrats, which still control the Senate, saying that we are happy to look at the budget and talk about potentially some fiscal reform, but we will not do it, and we will not hold that hostage when it comes to the debt ceiling. The Democrats really see this as a two-lane process, and the Republicans are going to see it as one.
President Biden yesterday was talking about Kevin McCarthy at one of the fundraisers, and he said that he was a decent man, but that he had to cater to some, quote, off-the-wall concessions, and then said, look, this is not your father's Republican Party. No, I mean it. This is a different breed of cat. What is the breed of cat in terms of the leadership for this next race that we see?
Well, we do know that we only have one, at the moment, Republican candidate running for 2024, if you're talking about the 2024 presidential election, and that's the former President Trump. But we have reporting from Mario Parker out overnight that Nikki Haley will be announcing her campaign February 15th. So she is the first of her former bosses. We know that there's a few that have insinuated they want to get in the race, but she is the first that is going to make this formal announcement. And, you know, she recently said, and Jonathan brought this up the other day when she was interviewed on Fox News, she said, you have to look at the situation right now, and does the leadership match the current problems? She said she didn't think it did, and that she thinks she could be the one to match the moment. So she's getting in the ring.
Former President Trump also thinks that he's the one to match the moment, but he's not really raising that much money relative to the others. What is the likelihood that he could forge some sort of independent race, which really might be, in some ways, the Democrats' best option?
No, I mean, Trump, if he runs, he's running on the Republican ticket. And while, yes, the fundraising has been lackluster, and the New York Times goes through that data perfectly this morning in terms of sizing him up versus past early days of a presidential race. When you announce you're going to be president, you do this with timing to know you can bring in those campaign dollars. I believe what the Trump campaign is bringing in per day is about $200,000 in their first critical few weeks. Compare that to former Governor Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton when they got into the race. These were $600,000, $800,000 a day. So Trump at the moment is not bringing in the money. It could show that he is losing a grip on the party, but I don't think this is a moment that you write him off, that he would not be the individual if he was to make it to the top on a Republican ticket, and that he would step aside and run as an independent.
Well, AMH, doesn't the fact that Nikki Haley's getting ready to run really underscore the fact that he is losing grip on the party? This is an individual that pledged not to if Trump made a run.
Yep. April 2021, she said, if my former boss runs, I will not. But Trump recently was talking to a South Carolina local television, said that Nikki Haley had called him and he had told her, if your heart's in it, you know, you got to do what your heart wants to do. But Trump hasn't really gone after Nikki Haley just yet. But he has gone after the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, especially when it comes to COVID. He said Florida was locked down longer than it should have been, and started attacking him. So I would say that his real concern is if a Governor Ron DeSantis gets in the race. At the moment, it doesn't seem like he's taking aim at Nikki Haley. But also, it's very early on, and this is going to be a wide field. We know that Mike Pompeo might throw his hat in the ring. We know that Mike Pence is looking at a run. I mean, there's a number of individuals who are sizing up whether they are going to make this case for 2024.
All to play for. AMH down in D.C. Anne-Marie, thank you, as always. This could be really gripping stuff on the Republican side, Tom. Haley, Pence, DeSantis, Pompeo, Trump.
It it ebbs and flows across hundreds of years. The Democratic Party used to be the nuts party. I mean, it goes way back to, I'm thinking Grover Cleveland, 1880.
Are you implying that the other party is now the nuts party?
No, but it ebbs and flows, where the Democrats were total chaos.
What kind of nut?
And then it comes back the other way. And clearly right now the Republicans have the chaos meter. John, what's really important here to bring up, and I know that someone like Amory Horton was so delicate that she never quaffed a Schaefer's or a Schlitz or a Stroh's or a PBR. My first British beer, Lisa, was John Courage Amber. And I remember tasting it and going, oh, this is what beer actually tastes like.
Actual beer.
Actual beer.
Yeah.
Is John Courage a fancy brand in England?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I just
Is Bud Light a fancy beer in the United States?
No,
is that a big one?
Coors.
We got
Yeah, it
that
is.
right?
It actually
That's
is.
like
Yeah, yeah.
legit.
Coors 3-2, I think, from
It's
Mr.
definitely,
Farrell.
you go into like a craft beer
What
place.
about Natty
Bud
Light? Natty Light, is that legit?
Look, I've got